All right, so this is something that has definitely been making headlines and maybe hasn't been fully unpacked yet because there is a lot of uncertainty. But what we're talking about are the US tariffs, if they are imposed in Canada, and how they could affect Canada's housing market. And this is actually a concerning question that not only for me, because I am heavily invested in the housing market, especially here in Lethbridge, Alberta, where I'm from, but I also wanted to take a minute to just talk about how this could affect the housing market overall in Canada, especially for me, as well as some of my clients. So whether you're buying or selling or just keeping an eye on the market, these tariffs could actually change the way housing prices are going to move in the future. Do I think that we're going to see an immediate shift in the housing market? Well, in certain parts of the countries, like in Ontario, we definitely could. But in other parts of the country, like Lethbridge, Alberta, where I'm located, I think that we're probably going to be a little bit more sheltered, and if we do see an effect, it's probably going to be a little bit more delayed. So what's going on, and should you be worried? Well, let's break it down. So first, let's kind of talk about what's actually going on with the US trade tariffs and, of course, Mr. Donald Trump. So here's the deal. The US and Donald Trump could be implementing 25% tariffs across the board on all Canadian goods. That's all Canadian goods that the US buys from Canada. And as of recent, he said he's actually reducing this on oil and gas to just a 10% tariff, which is not good news, but at least it's better than 25%. So these 25% tariffs will include things like lumber, steel, and aluminum. Of course, many other things. And while this might not sound like a big problem for you, and maybe it's just a problem for big corporations, it's definitely going to trickle down and affect everyday people just like you and me, and especially home buyers and especially builders. So lumber tariffs are actually a big one, as Canada is the largest foreign supplier of softwood lumber to the US. I mean, we do send a pile of lumber down to the US, which is good for them and obviously really good for us. And for years, there's always been disputes about pricing and trade rules. And as of right now, we're already dealing with the US duties on lumber. So with these new tariffs on Canadian wood products, that means two things. Prices for American builders are going to go up, especially in the short term, but Canadian companies who produce these wood products might also suffer if demand for their product starts to drop, which of course it most likely would. However, when this demand drops, you think that prices are actually going to go down? I mean, that's how supply and demand works. But in my opinion, it's actually going to have the opposite effect because these lumber companies are going to have to dramatically slow down production, and there could be closures of some of these companies even, as well as even massive layoffs. Now, steel and aluminum tariffs are just another piece to this puzzle. Those materials are used in everything from high-rise condos to appliances and even infrastructure around new developments. If those costs go up due to these tariffs, developers are going to feel the squeeze, and guess what? That usually gets passed down to the home buyer. So now that we know the bare minimum of the basics about how these tariffs are going to be working, let's talk about how this is going to affect the Canadian housing market. So let's break this down. Tariffs both have direct and indirect effects on the housing market. And I think we're going to see three big shifts. Number one is that home construction is about to get a lot more expensive. Over the past 2 years, you have likely heard thousands of times that Canada is in a major housing crisis, and we need to have more homes built faster and cheaper than ever before in order to match the demand for housing. Well, unfortunately, these tariffs are gonna get in the way of that in a big way, especially if our government fights back with tariffs that we're importing from the US. So if these lumber and steel prices rise, developers are gonna have higher costs when it comes to building new homes, new townhomes, and new condo buildings. Now, we've already seen how the supply chain issues and inflation has pushed prices higher in new builds in recent years, especially due to the pandemic, and tariffs could have another added layer of pressure. Basically, what's going to happen is that developers are not going to eat those costs, and those increasing costs, again, are just going to be passed down to the home buyer. So the second effect is that there could be a slowdown in construction, which could even worsen our housing supply problem. If we continue down this road of higher construction costs and building gets way too expensive, some builders might delay or even cancel projects because of uncertainty of how the demand is going to be for a higher product. As I mentioned, Canada is already struggling with a lack of housing inventory, especially in major cities, and a slowdown in construction would only make the problem worse and have it spiral even further out of control. And because of that, housing prices are inevitably going to continue to increase, especially for new builds. The third is that home renovations and home improvement costs are also going to rise. So let's say you're not in the market for a new home and you're comfortable where you're at, or you want to go out and save a little money on those new home costs and buy a resale home and put some money into it to renovate it, or you just want to spruce the place up a bit and do some of those renos, these tariffs could still hit your wallet. If you need a new fence, a new deck, a renovation of any sort, or new appliances, all those materials are going to cost more. And that's before we even talk about the labor shortages that's already driving up prices on these trades. In fact, when we're talking about this in terms of renovations and even those new builds, Canada imports $3.5 billion worth of glass from the US every single year, and over $3 billion in appliances, as well as $2 billion in hardware for things like bathroom fixtures. So these are things that all could have a big effect on the price of homes in Canada. So just to sum up how bad this could get for the housing market, we also need to take a look at the economic impact of other areas and not just the housing market. For example, as I mentioned, in Ontario, these tariffs could have a massive impact effect on car manufacturing as well. And if those car manufacturers, especially the employees of those companies, are even just worried about losing their job, let alone actually losing it, that could be a big shock to consumer confidence. And when consumer confidence is down, literally nobody is thinking about buying a new home. And when this ripple effect hits all the other related industries in Ontario, demand for housing could actually drop and could bring prices down in the short term. However, in places like Red Deer, Fort McMurray, and even Medicine Hat, those areas are highly affected by the oil sector. And again, with these tariffs on oil, these companies could experience some shifts in their market, which could affect those housing markets quite the same. It's quite similar to how we see housing markets kind of fall and drop down when oil prices drop in those communities. Now, fortunately, not everyone loses when it comes to tariffs when these are into play. There are some potential winners in this scenario, and if you're a homeowner already, then you could actually be one of them. And first, homeowners could actually see property values on the rise. If new home construction starts to slow down and fewer properties hit the market, resale homes could become even more valuable. Like literally, we just saw this back with COVID, that lots of the housing starts really kind of collapsed and we didn't see many. And what happened? The rest of the market really started to pick up. If demand stays strong and supply starts to shrink, again, like we just saw over the last 2 years, that could mean housing prices are going to keep rising. So if you already own a property, tariffs could actually boost your home's value over time. So the other area that could benefit from these tariffs is a rental market. And there are some people who benefit from this and some people who aren't going to benefit, just to put it lightly. So again, like we just saw during COVID, if there's fewer homes that are being built and fewer people can afford to buy, guess where they're going to go? They're going to have to live somewhere, so they're going to turn to the rental market. And this could push rents up even higher, which is going to be awesome for landlords, but it's going to be really tough for renters in an already struggling environment with high rent prices and very low demand out there. So another thing that we could see is that investors might shift some of their strategies. So right now, during this big condo boom out in Ontario with apartments, lots of investors were kind of buying those speculatively, especially in Vancouver as well. We might see a shift of people investing in some of those big condo and apartment buildings and shift them to more resale detached properties or even smaller multifamily units to take advantage of the rising demand in housing as well as those higher rent prices. But of course, this is not all good news. The people that this is going to affect the most, in my opinion, are going to be first-time home buyers. And they're probably going to see this struggle the most with new home prices that just keep rising and there doesn't seem to be an end. And if mortgage rates stay high, affordability could get even worse. But thankfully, we have seen the Bank of Canada reduce their interest rate over the past couple months. And likely if tariffs come in, that's probably going to continue. So will US tariffs completely crash Canada's housing market? Well, the short answer is no. But they could definitely push prices higher and make new builds even more expensive and create even more challenges for people to enter this current market. The key takeaway here is that trade policies don't exist just in a little vacuum. There's actually a ripple throughout the entire economy. And in this case, it could make housing even more difficult to make affordable. That's the sum of it. So just to sum up my thoughts on what's going on with the US trade tariffs, especially in Lethbridge and how this affects us and my market. Thankfully, Lethbridge is always pretty insulated from these big market shifts, and we're not really affected by oil prices or like big manufacturing as a whole, although there are some bigger plants here that ship to the States, like Lay's potato chips, for example. So we could see a little bit of an impact here. But honestly, there's so much immigration moving to Lethbridge right now that I think that with our low inventory that we already have, there's going to be more pressure on that inventory, and I do expect prices to continue to increase. Now, when it comes to new builds in Lethbridge, if these tariffs come into place and we fight back with more tariffs, I could see that, these hard costs for builders start to increase, which is just going to increase the cost of building even further. And if the new builds start to increase and they become unaffordable, then that could put more pressure on the resale market, which again is just going to continue to put prices higher. Now, if you guys are planning on moving to Lethbridge, or you're in the area and you're looking to make a move, whether to buy or sell, all of my information is located down in the description below. And if you guys like this video and want to see more, there's a whole playlist right here of other videos just like this, or you can also check out my home tours. And finally, if you guys never want to miss another video on this channel, just hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you guys in the next video.